Okay, let's dive into a concept that sounds like it's ripped straight from a sci-fi movie. Defending against incoming missiles, not just from the ground, but from space.
Yeah, we're talking about this program, Golden Dome.
Exactly. And it's a hugely ambitious idea, right? It's prompting discussions about everything from, you know, cutting-edge tech to global stability and just eye-watering costs.
Absolutely, it touches on so many things.
So we've gathered insights from a stack of sources here, reports, straight from the White House, details from Pentagon officials, some analyses from external experts.
And coverage from places like The Guardian, AP, the BBC.
Right, a good mix.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to try and cut through all that material and really pull out the essential nuggets for you.
Yeah, figure out what is Golden Dome according to these sources. What are its stated goals, the tech it proposes, the timeline.
And critically, what's the real story behind those massive price tags being thrown around?
Let's see what these sources truly tell us about this plan.
So right off the bat, how is this Golden Dome program envisioned? Like, what's the core concept the sources lay out?
Okay, so the sources describe Golden Dome as a multi-layered missile defense system. Think layers of defense, right? Not just one single heel.
Layer.
It aims to integrate capabilities we already have on the ground and at sea, but with a really significant, maybe even unprecedented component, space-based systems.
Okay, space-based. So integrating existing stuff with something new and big up in space. What's the goal for this whole combined system then?
Well, its stated purpose is comprehensive defense against missiles at every phase of an attack.
Every phase.
Yeah, that means before launch, during the initial boost phase when the missile just takes off, then in the mid-course phase as it travels through space, and finally during its descent as it heads back towards its target. Hitting a missile at any of those points is incredibly difficult.
Right.
Hitting them at all points, that requires something truly complex.
Wow, yeah, defending against a missile in all four stages sounds almost impossible. I read something about it being partly inspired by Israel's Iron Dome system. Is that right?
That comparison does come up in the sources, yes, as sort of a partial inspiration for the concept of a dome-like defense.
Okay.
But Golden Dome is intended to be vastly larger and, crucially, designed to counter a much broader and more sophisticated set of threats than Iron Dome handles.
Like what kind of threats?
We're talking about next-generation weapons like hypersonic missiles.
Which are super fast.
Incredibly fast and maneuverable, yeah. And also these things called fractional orbital bombardment systems, or FOBS, which
Yeah.
could potentially attack from space itself.
Okay, so way beyond what Iron Dome deals with. And the stated urgency. Why now for something this elaborate?
The sources frame it mostly in terms of keeping pace with adversaries, specifically China and Russia.
Right.
The argument presented is that their increasingly sophisticated missile systems are specifically designed to exploit gaps in the U.S.'s current defenses.
And the sources also mention space weapons from them too.
They do. They note that both China and Russia have already developed and put offensive weapon capabilities into space, so it's framed as a response.
So it's presented as a necessary evolution because other nations are pushing the boundaries. Okay, let's talk about the name itself, Golden Dome. The sources had a fun little detail about what it was called internally at first.
They did, yeah. According to people familiar with the early discussions, inside the White House National Security Council, the program was initially nicknamed Moonshot.
Moonshot. Huh. Given the ambition you just described, that seems kind of fitting, actually.
It definitely captured the scale of the vision, right? Aiming high. However, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth reportedly wasn't a fan of Moonshot.
Didn't like it.
Apparently not. The sources say he suggested a tiered system concept, silver, gold, platinum for different levels of capability.
Ah, okay.
And only the gold tier was actually costed out initially. So that's how we ended up with Golden Dome.
Silver, gold, platinum. Sticking with gold for now. Interesting how names evolve. Now, this is where the sources reveal one of the biggest discrepancies and, frankly, one of the most significant nuggets, the timeline.
Right.
President Trump made a very specific public statement about when he expects this system to be ready.
Yes, he did. From the Oval Office on May 20th, 2025, he expressed confidence it would be fully operational before his term ends in early 2029.
Fully operational by 2029. That's just, what, 3-4 years away for something so technically complex and, well, unprecedented.
And that's exactly where the information from Pentagon officials and sources closer to the implementation plan diverges pretty dramatically.
How so?
They expect that the defense weapons, the parts that actually shoot down missiles, particularly from space, would realistically only be ready for a demonstration test.
Just a test.
Yeah, and likely under, perfect conditions by the end of 2028.
Wait, a demonstration versus fully operational? That's a huge difference. What explains that gap according to the sources?
Well, the sources explain that the program is necessarily being rolled out in phases. It's not all happening at once.
Okay, phases make sense.
The initial phase isn't actually about deploying space weapons at all. It's focused on integrating data systems and building that underlying satellite tracking network.
Ah, the tracking part first.
Exactly. The actual development and deployment of space-based weapons capability comes much later in the plan.
Okay, so what can they realistically build in the shorter term? The sources mention an 18-month time frame for something.
Yes. Within about 18 months, the sources suggest the U.S. might realistically have the foundation in place.
The foundation meaning?
Meaning a military network of satellites and communication systems in space capable of tracking hundreds of inbound missiles simultaneously.
That sounds impressive for tracking. But like you said, tracking isn't shooting.
Precisely, and that's the critical point the sources make. At that 18-month stage, there would still be zero capability to take out missiles using space-based weapons. Zero. And even by the end of President Trump's stated timeline in 2029, the Pentagon's internal view, according to these sources, is that they might only have the tracking network potentially attempting to integrate with still untested space-based weapons prototypes.
Untested prototypes.
Right, and that core boost phase interception capability hitting a missile moments after launch, which is kind of the flagship concept,
Yeah.
that's not expected to be ready, not even close, maybe.
So the biggest nugget here is perhaps the vast gulf between the ambitious political vision and the Pentagon's more grounded reality regarding the timeline.
Definitely.
It's more about building the foundation and maybe demonstrating a limited capability, not full operational defense from space by 2029. That brings us right to the technical challenges. You mentioned the difficulty of boost phase interception. Why is hitting a missile right after launch, especially from space, so incredibly hard?
Well, the sources really highlight this. That specific technology identifying a missile in that very narrow window, like the first 30 seconds to 2 minutes after launch and then killing it, it's just not expected to be ready anytime soon.
And why is that?
The major hurdle mentioned is the sheer difficulty for a counter missile launched from space to, cut through Earth's atmosphere with enough speed and force to successfully intercept a ballistic missile during that boost phase.
Ah, punching back through the atmosphere.
Exactly. It's a physics problem, an engineering problem. It might take years to solve, if it's even feasible at all, with current or near-term tech.
And the sources provide some context too, right?
Yeah.
Comparing it to existing challenges.
Yes, they point out that the U.S. Defense Department has been working on ground-based interceptors since the 1980s.
Right, the GBI system.
Yeah, and those are primarily designed for mid-course or glide phase interception, hitting a missile after it's left the atmosphere but before it starts coming down.
Which should be easier, maybe.
You'd think, but even after decades of development, these ground-based interceptors still have only a roughly 20% success rate in tests.
20%. Oof.
Yeah, so that gives you a sense of how inherently difficult missile defense is, even against less challenging targets and phases than boost phase from space.
A 20% success rate after decades really underscores the complexity. Okay, who are the key technology players involved in this ambitious effort, according to the sources? Any names mentioned?
The sources heavily feature Elon Musk's SpaceX. It seems the space-based network for tracking is likely to rely pretty significantly on their capabilities.
Makes sense with Starlink and all that.
Right. SpaceX has apparently been developing a sophisticated next-generation tracking system referred to as the Aerial Moving Target Identifier.
Aerial Moving Target Identifier.
Yeah, and the Defense Department acquired the first prototypes of the system last year. That suggests it's seen as pretty crucial for Golden Dome's tracking layer.
Okay, so SpaceX is a big piece of the puzzle for the tracking network.
Yeah.
And who's the overall overseer for the U.S. military? Which branch?
That would be the U.S. Space Force, under the leadership of Gen Michael Getlane. He'll oversee the project.
Space Force's baby, then.
Seems like it. And General Chance Saltzman, the head of the Space Force, is quoted in the sources. He explicitly stated that the space-based weapons component represents new and emerging requirements for missions that have never before been accomplished.
Never before been accomplished. That's a powerful phrase. Really reinforces the scale of the technical challenge we were just talking about.
Absolutely. It's not just improving something existing, it's trying to do something entirely new.
Now, let's talk about the numbers, because ambitious visions, especially ones attempting something never before accomplished, usually come with truly staggering potential price tags. What cost estimates are being discussed in the sources?
Well, initially, Trump and the Pentagon have cited a figure somewhere in the region of $175 billion for the program.
Okay, $175 billion. That's a huge number, obviously.
Yeah.
How does that initial figure break down? Do the sources give any detail on spending plans?
They do detail some reported Pentagon allocations for specific years. It looks like roughly $17.6 billion for 2026.
Okay.
Then a big jump to around $50 billion for 2027.
What?
And then hitting approximately $100 billion for 2028.
So it ramps up fast. Those numbers add up to around $167.6 billion, which is pretty close to that initial $175 billion figure.
Right, it aligns with that ballpark.
But the sources also suggest this $175 billion might just be a starting point.
Exactly. Pentagon officials privately noted in the sources that the final cost could end up being significantly higher. It really depends heavily on how ambitious the final system is ordered to be.
How so?
Well, for example, protecting against a hypothetical scenario involving, say, 100 incoming ballistic missiles might require deploying thousands of satellites as part of the defensive screen.
Thousands.
Yeah. And these satellites wouldn't last forever. They'd need periodic replacement, which adds massive ongoing costs over the life of the system.
Thousands of satellites needing replacement. That it really pushes the cost envelope way, way out. And then there's the estimate from the Congressional Budget Office. The CBO's numbers are different.
They are dramatically different. The CBO provided its own estimate, suggesting that just the space-based components of Golden Dome, leaving aside the ground and sea elements, could cost as much as $542 billion over the next 20 years.
Yeah, hold on. Just the space part, potentially costing over $500 billion, compared to an initial total program estimate of $175 billion.
Yeah.
The difference between $175 billion for everything initially and potentially $542 billion plus over time for just part of the system, that discrepancy itself is a major nugget from these sources. It just highlights how uncertain and potentially vast the final cost could be.
Absolutely. Huge uncertainty there.
And the initial funding request Trump has put forward, how much are they asking for to start?
He has requested an initial $25 billion for the program. According to the sources, it's reportedly included within a proposed tax break bill.
Okay, $25 billion to kick things off. So you have a program still defining its requirements, with initial funding requested, but wildly different long-term cost estimates ranging into the hundreds of billions, maybe over $500 billion just for the space segment.
Yeah.
The financial landscape here is incredibly complex and uncertain based on these sources.
It absolutely is. And this isn't just a domestic technical and financial challenge. It also has pretty significant international dimensions as well.
Right. The sources mentioned Canada's potential involvement. What's the dynamic there?
Well, Trump publicly mentioned Canada's potential participation. He even floated a figure of $61 billion for them to contribute.
$61 billion.
Yeah, or perhaps a bit less seriously, suggesting they could become the 51st U.S. state for free.
Oh, my.
The sources did note the origin of that specific $61 billion figure wasn't really clear.
A rather unique negotiation style, perhaps. Were there more, let's say, formal discussions about Canada within the Pentagon, according to the sources?
Yes, the sources report discussions about Canada happened months ago within the Pentagon. But they focus primarily on Canada potentially integrating its existing satellite and radar data into the Golden Dome network.
Ah, data sharing.
Right. Not necessarily, buying into or contributing financially to the space-based weapon deployment itself. More about plugging their sensors into the bigger picture.
And what's been Canada's public response, if any?
According to the BBC source, Canada's former defense minister did acknowledge interest. He stated that